Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to another preview and prediction video. This weekend, Errol Spence taking on Tszyu in Australia. A mega fight taking place in Australia. One of the biggest fights that you're ever going to see in Australia. It was supposed to be one of the biggest cards of all time. That took a massive hit during the week. The fact that Jamal Charlo is no longer on the card at all. Alright, that co-main event has been scrapped. Jamal Charlo was not allowed in the country. And I believe Stephen Fulton versus Liam Wilson, which got promoted to a co-main, is also now a title eliminator. The winner to face Anthony Kakache. And Ahmed Redder versus Paul Fleming, I believe, has been put on the main card to replace Charlo versus Mazudia. But either way, a mega main event, Errol Spence Jr. versus Tszyu. And when we talk about this fight, because we are going to preview the fight, we're going to make our prediction for it, who I think is going to win it. But when you talk about this fight, it is such a difficult fight to predict because, you know, we're talking about Tszyu, very active. He's been in world title fights. He's been in, lesser fights, Velasquez, Nurja, Joey Spencer. But he's been active. Like, he's a guy that's fighting 2 or 3 times every year. Regardless of results, he's fighting 2 or 3 times every year. You compare that to Errol Spence. Errol Spence, we haven't seen him since July of 2023, where he got his ass absolutely handed to him. All right, so in between, this fight against Tszyu and Bud Crawford, Tim's taken 7 fights, and we haven't seen Errol once. So we're talking about Errol Spence, very unpredictable because we haven't seen him. We don't know what to expect from him. Not only the return from a long layoff, but the return from a beatdown and a long layoff versus a guy like Tszyu, who, although has been very active, a very poor set of results. Even in the wins, there's been more criticism in the wins than there has been praise in the wins. And you mount that on top of the losses, it all sorts to builds up to say, all right, Tim, are we going to see anywhere near your best? Because if Errol Spence is at his best, you're going to lose if you're not at his best. And you're looking at these two guys and saying, all right, we know on a technical level, if we talk about a technical level, Errol Spence will be, and forever has been, the better fighter between Errol Spence and Tszyu. And that's no question. Errol Spence is technically a much better fighter, a much cleaner fighter than what Tszyu is. All right, and we've seen the holes in Tszyu's game over the past few fights, and you see, those left hooks, the leading left hooks from Bakram Murtazaliev. You see that straight left hand early in the fight against Fedora that dropped Tszyu, and you're saying, all right, against an orthodox fighter, you're getting hit with left hooks. Against a southpaw fighter, you're getting hit with straight lefts. And now we're looking at Errol Spence, who is another fighter that is that southpaw fighter. So I do think on a technical level, there are holes in Tszyu's defense against a southpaw fighter. So if Errol Spence comes in here, absolutely, like we're looking at Errol Spence 2019 type of fighter, maybe even earlier 2018, Tszyu's going to be in a lot of trouble. And I don't know how technically he handles defensively against a southpaw fighter, because we've seen him recently against a southpaw fighter in Fedora. Didn't work. We saw him against the orthodox fighter in Bakram Murtazaliev, got dropped 3 or 4 times in that fight, and he was getting peppered with lead left hands. So when you talk about these fighters on a technical level, we're talking about all the advantages going to Errol Spence, in my opinion, because Errol Spence is just technically more efficient. He is just the better boxer than what Tszyu is. And although we can say, all right, Bud Crawford found a lot of holes in Errol Spence, he dropped him numerous times, Tszyu is not what Bud Crawford is. Bud Crawford is one of the greatest fighters that I have ever seen. He's one of the greatest fighters of this era, this generation, possibly of all time. There's plenty of people that would put Bud Crawford on their Mount Rushmore. Multiple division undisputed champion. The fact that he made the move from welterweight, where he was undisputed, all the way up to super middleweight and became undisputed against Canelo Alvarez. Bud Crawford isn't your everyday, ordinary champion. This guy is one of the greatest of all time. So to lose to him, there is no shame on it. But the question is, how does Errol Spence return from the loss? All right? How do you rebuild from a loss? Errol Spence was untouchable, right? Errol Spence was that untouchable, undefeated, elite, unified welterweight world champion before he went in there with Bud. We're talking about a guy that beat Kell Brook, he beat Sean Porter, he beat Danny Garcia, he beat Mikey Garcia, he beat Yordenis Ugas, right? He was beating everybody in the division. Former world champions, current world champions. He was beating everybody. And a lot of those fights, he was winning by knockout. Comes into this fight against Bud Crawford, all right? And we know all the issues about the retina. We know all the issues about the car crash. But don't forget that that car crash happened. He had 2 fights before the Bud Crawford one, right? So as much as, yeah, the car crash might have taken some effects, all right, maybe his sight's not as good. He had 2 fights that he won coming into that Bud Crawford fight. So it's more, how do you return from that beatdown from Bud Crawford? How do you go from this untouchable, undefeated, I can beat absolutely everybody fighter to losing to Bud Crawford where you got demolished and now a 3-year layoff coming into this fight? And that's basically the biggest talking point when we preview this fight is the mentality of either fighter. Who's got the stronger mentality? Who's going to be, even if they're not 100% on fight night, who is going to have the higher percent of performance? Who's going to be 75%? Who's going to be 60%? Who's going to perform at an 80% level? Who's going to perform at a 75% level? That's what we're talking about. I don't expect either of these fighters to look like their old selves. I don't expect to see Errol Spence, who he was against Sean Porter. I don't expect to see Tszyu against Tony Harrison, right? I don't expect to see that. I expect to see 2 damaged fighters, but who is the least damaged fighter in it? And when you talk about Errol Spence, you're almost looking at 2 ends of like a spectrum here. You're looking at Errol Spence. All right, you got beat by Bud Crawford, but did you have to take 3 years off to return? I like the fact that you had a layoff, maybe 12 months to recoup, rebuild, reset. But 3 years is a long time. You compare that to Tszyu, and we all heard the criticism around Tszyu. Tszyu gets beaten by Fundora in that fashion. Unfortunate, massive cut on his head. But we all knew mentally he was not ready to take that ring. Loses to Fundora, unfortunately. Massive cut. Lots of PTSD from that. All right, you let that heal. You reset, you let that heal. 12 months' time, you come back. But instead, we saw Tszyu come straight back into the ring against Barkram Tartali, where he got his ass handed to him. All right, a worse beating than what Bud did to Errol, Barkram did to Tim. Few months after being cut and beaten by Fundora, your first defeat of your professional career. So you're looking at a guy in Tszyu that, despite losing and despite the fashion of losses, all right, lost to Fundora, straight back in with Barkram. Lost to Barkram, straight back in with Spencer. Beat Spencer, straight back in with Fundora. Loses to Fundora, all right, straight back in Velasquez. Heaps and heaps of fights in a row, despite results, despite beatdown, despite, mentality, he was returning. So you got a guy that's consistently fighting, all right, probably against what we think. We think, all right, take a long break, versus a guy that we say, all right, take a break, but don't take that longer break. So we got 2 guys here that it's like, coming into this fight, which was the best way of doing it, or is either the wrong way of doing it? Errol Spence, I like the fact that you've taken a break, but you probably shouldn't have taken 3 years. Tszyu, you should have taken a break, but at least you've been active. So when we talk about this fight, we got to talk about the coaches. We've got Ronnie Shields there working with Errol Spence. I think that's a very good pick. I think Ronnie Shields, he's got a lot of experience with a lot of top fighters. He's been in around. I don't put Ronnie Shields as like one of the great coaches of our modern day, but he is a very, very good coach. He's an accomplished coach. He's worked with some of the top fighters in the sport. And then you've got Jeff Fenech as well. Now, Jeff Fenech, when I look at Jeff Fenech and what he can bring to Camp Tszyu, for me, none of it's technical. I don't look at Jeff Fenech and say he's going to tactically rebuild Tszyu. Jeff Fenech is there almost like a father figure. He's like, a godfather to Tszyu. He's the guy that's there making sure that when Tim's in an interview, he's got his back. When Tim's getting pressed, he's got his back. When Tim's in the corner, he's got his back. When Tim's in danger, he's got his back. It's all mental. Jeff Fenech and Tszyu. It is all creating that bond, strong mentality. Let's see what we can get. Let's try and get the best performance out of Tszyu, because this is their first fight together, a few months together. I'm talking 2 months. Maybe it was 3 months, but around that 2 months' time, you're not going to technically rebuild Tszyu, all right? That takes years. It takes years to rebuild a fighter. So that's not what Jeff Fenech's been brought in to do. He's brought in there to build the mentality of Tszyu. With Errol Spence, you got Ronnie Shields there, a very, very good coach, and I think he will bring more technical know-how into the fight and a game plan and a setup for Errol Spence. He's not changing Errol Spence. He's telling Errol Spence what to do, because he knows Errol Spence has the technical capability to put that game plan into action. So it is very contrasting ways of setting up your team. There's a lot of question marks about Tim Tszyu's team. I mean, this is what his third or fourth change of coaching staff and team within the past 2 years. So, yeah, we're going to have to wait and see whether we've always known Jeff Fennick and Tim Tszyu. It was like, when is it going to happen? These two guys, like, they should be working together. When is it going to happen? That's finally come into play. Let's see if it works, because that's at the end of the day, we don't know. We're going to have to wait and see if it works. Now, when I look at how this fight's going to go, I see this fight as a fight that Tim Tszyu, despite the last two results, Velasquez-Nerja, where he looked okay, all right, he wins shutout victories, but he still looks tentative. He still looks like he's a bit worried about doing anything that'll result in him getting hit. That needs to change, and it needs to change quickly, because you can't go into this fight against Errol Spence and think you're going to outbox him without being any sort of aggressiveness. All right, like against Nerja was on the ropes within 3 rounds, and there was no, let me step on the gas, let me get him out of here. Same with Velasquez. Velasquez offered nothing. There was no step on the gas pedal, let's get him out of here. It was almost Tim Tszyu from a few years ago, ultra aggressive, to now ultra tentative. We sort of need that middle ground of work your good technical boxing and implement a bit of aggressiveness. Don't be either one way or the other. And I think coming into this fight, he needs to be technical, but he needs to be aggressive. He needs to get in the face of Errol Spence. He needs to test Errol, because Errol's coming off a massive beating. Will Errol have the mental sort of capacity to get off the canvas again? How will Errol respond to somebody bullying him again? How will he respond to being knocked down again? And Tim needs to do that. If this fight spends the whole sort of fight on the feet and Errol doesn't touch the canvas once, Errol's going to feel very, very comfortable. He's not going to worry about the power coming back. He's going to be able to be aggressive. He's going to do what he wants. And Tim Tszyu can't allow that. He has to be aggressive. And for Errol Spence, we talked about Tim's mentality. For Errol Spence, he's going to be mentally strong as well. How do you react to being hit? How do you react to if you have to get off the canvas? And then, like I said, the technical stuff all falls into play, because for me, he is just much better fighter than what Tim Tszyu is. Tim Tszyu has flaws in his defense. And if Tim Tszyu is this sort of trying to be this technical fighter, whereas I think he's better when he's trying to be a Beterbiev, when he's trying to be a bully, if he does try to be a technical fighter, he's going to get outclassed. He's going to be outshined, and we're going to see that. So I think for Tim, be aggressive, but controlled aggression. Everything needs to be done, technically, but add a bit of spite. Get on the inside. Bring it to Errol Spence. Don't be on the back foot. Don't be trying to dance around. Don't be trying to be this clean technical boxer, because I've heard him talk about trying to become a cleaner boxer in the past few months, past few fights, cleaning stuff up technically. I like it, but don't go too far one way, because you're not Dimitri Bivol at the end of the day. You're still a bit of a bully. That's what Tim Tszyu was built his career on. It was getting in the face of his opponent. It was muscle. It was power. It was big power punching. But you can add some technicality into that. You can still be a bully, but you don't have to then just throw away your defense completely. So, look, for me, this will and entirely fall down to how the fighters turn up on the night. That's the end of the day. That's the make or break of this fight. It is who turns up better. I think Tim Tszyu, he's got a lot more to lose. He does. I think Tim Tszyu, when you look at this fight, I spoke to him a few months ago ahead of that Nerja fight, and he says to me, this fight for me is bigger than a world title. That's a lot of pressure to be putting on yourself.
The Errol Spence fight is a bigger fight than a world title.
You think?
Yeah.
Because of just the name solely?
Just the caliber of an event. He's still the number one guy. He's only lost against Crawford.
That is a lot of pressure to be putting on yourself. Coming into this fight, to say that this is bigger than a world title, Errol Spence isn't looking at this fight that way. Errol Spence has been in bigger fights. Errol Spence has been in there with better fighters. This is another go at it for Errol Spence, and that's got its own problems. But for Tim Tszyu, he's putting a lot of pressure on himself and on this fight. And I think Tim Tszyu knows that a loss to Errol Spence here, yeah, it could be curtains. I think Tim Tszyu, whether he wins or loses, we see him again in the ring. And I can't say the same thing about Errol Spence. I think if Errol Spence loses, we don't see him again. I think if Errol wins, we most definitely see him again. But I've heard him talk coming into this fight and saying,
if my family had it their way, I'll be done and right off in the sunset and on a ranch somewhere. So so this is for me. I'm somebody who really enjoy boxing. It's something I've been doing for a long time, And and then I just stopped doing it cold. But I just got the urge to do it again, and it's definitely hard coming back. But once I started training and just put my all into it, it got better. My body got adapted to training, and things got a lot smoother and easier, and I felt pretty normal. Felt normal. So I was like, man, maybe I can make another run at this. So definitely, going to make another run.
Look, I'm doing this for me. I'm back for me, nobody else. If a world title run comes, it comes, but I'm taking it one fight at a time. That's got its pros and it's got its cons. Yes, all right, you don't feel the pressure as much. You're looking relaxed. You're ready for this fight. I don't think he's taking it lightly. I've seen the face-offs. I've seen the tension when they do, the interviews and stuff. Errol Spence is here for business. Errol Spence is here to beat Tszyu. But is that hunger there? All right, it's easy to be confident in your ability and say, I've done the work, but are you doing the work? Are you actually putting in the work? A bit like in Rocky 3. When Rocky, he set up this convention to have all the fans watching him train, and he's saying that he wants to fight, and he's there in the gym every single day, but he's not taking it as seriously as Mr. T is doing it. I think Tszyu and Jeff Fennick are putting in the hard yards every single day. It's going to be a wait and see whether Errol has done the same thing, because 3 years out of the sport, a bit of a falling out of love with the sport. You're back, but we're not really sure why you're back, and you don't know why you're back. Yeah, it can spell trouble, but at the same time, it can be just confident, not feeling the pressure. We've put in the work. We're ready to go. We're going to show the class. And look, my final prediction for this fight, I don't want to sit on the fence because I have an answer that's very sit on the fence. My answer that's sit on the fence is, look, the guy that is wanting this fight more wins it, right? It is the guy that is put in the work in training. It is, if Errol Spence is here just for a paycheck, Tszyu wins this by a mile. So let's go off. If Errol Spence and Tszyu both come into this fight 100%, looking like them old selves, Errol Spence wins this fight. That's my prediction. Errol Spence. If Errol Spence looks like 2018 Spence, all right. If Tszyu is still this fighter that we've seen against Nerja, against Velasquez, against Fundora, against Barkram, Errol wins this fight because Errol is just a better fighter than Tszyu, and that's the end of the day. And I think if Errol Spence does look like that, if Tszyu does look the way he has in the past 2 fights, I don't think Errol just wins. I think Errol stops Tim. I think the way that Tszyu quit on that stool against Fundora in the second fight, that wasn't a Tszyu that I think we would have seen 3 or 4 years ago. Tim would have gone out on his shield like he did against Barkram. And I've heard Jeff Fennick saying, if things go bad in a fight for Tim, I will be there to save the day. So, yeah, my prediction for this fight, if both fighters come in 100%, I think Errol Spence wins this fight, and I think he stops Tim. But you never know. This fight is, we've had 50-50s this year, where we're talking, all right, Xander Zeiss versus Jerome Butsenis, 2 guys at the top of their game. Teofimo Lopez-Shakur, 2 guys at the top of their game. Fabio Woodley versus Daniel Dubois, what a fight, 50-50. Either guy could knock the other guy out. And I feel like all of those are positive 50-50s. This one's a 50-50 because nobody knows what to expect. Guys, this has been a long preview. This has been a long prediction video. I did want to talk about it in depth because it is such an interesting fight. And I haven't been making too many videos, so I thought we'd have a good chat. I am going to go now and film, hopefully, the Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury video that I've been trying to make and put out for this weekend, because those 2 guys are fighting as well, which has been a little bit forgotten. All right, like yesterday, I watched the Tyson Fury stream for the press conference, and I swear there was about 200 people watching it. So definitely forgotten, because Errol Spence versus Tszyu is taking all of the headlines this weekend. Guys, jump in the comments. Let me know your prediction for this fight. What do you think? I know I've taken an unpopular opinion, especially waving this Australian flag behind me, so I can guarantee I'm going to get fucking hounded in the comments because I've said that Errol Spence should win this fight if he's there. But as we know, no bias on this channel. Absolutely no favoritism on this channel. You can guarantee that come fight night, I will be cheering the fuck out of Tszyu, and I hope he wins it. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to see Errol Spence win it, but we're here to give unbiased opinions, and my unbiased opinion is Errol Spence should come in if he's ready to go, if this is Errol of old, and beat Tszyu. Like, subscribe. I'm out of here, guys. See ya.